Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew Mears. I'm the Chief Executive of Lead Candidates, and I am delighted to say that we are joined today by Richard Nugent, Managing Director of 21 Leadership and successful published author. Richard is here today to talk to us about his latest release, The Alignment Advantage. I'll put a link in the video to say where you can pick up a copy, but without further ado, I will pass over to Richard and get him to introduce himself, and then we'll go from there. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. It always feels odd introducing myself to an audience when we've known each other for so long. But as I say, the CEO, MD of 21 Leadership, and our business is built on a fundamental belief that leadership capability is the competitive advantage in business today. So if you take similar types of organizations, either one of them can, they can upgrade their salary brackets, they can, bring in new system infrastructure. But really our belief is that it's the business that has the greatest capability or the greatest depth of capability to coach, lead, motivate, inspire, create strategy and execute it, lead change and drive change that will be more successful in the long run. And we work with, it's hard to profile our clients to a certain degree because everyone who we've worked with, certainly for the past few years, has been a client somewhere else before. Okay. So, and they tend to take us with us or direct recommendations. So that means we kind of separate out from the heartland a little bit. But if I was to try and kind of characterize our clients, typically FTSE 250 plus, and we have a big, probably about 70% of our clients are in leisure, hospitality, family attraction businesses, those kind of organizations. We're doing quite a lot in tech gaming businesses as well. So typically, really fast-paced, really demanding, often growing, always changing. And then, as I say, we've got these offshoots into some, heavily regulated industries, which I know is relevant to your audience. Yeah. So we do some work with some financial services organizations, some building societies, for example, which wouldn't be in our usual demographic, but, you and I grew up a bit in that industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's, really fascinating in terms of the constraints of that business and how you drive change through within those constraints. Also places like housing associations. So we've got quite a broad range of clients. We're really proud of the kind of clients we work with, from people like Merlin Entertainment, who are second only to Disney in their sector. In the UK, they've got Alton Towers, Thorpe Park, Cheshunt World of Adventures, London Eye. Globally, they are Legolands and Sea Life Centres. We're just about to start our first project with Netflix, which is really exciting. So, we work with some brilliant brands, brilliant people, and, hopefully make a big difference along the way.
And really international, so culturally very diverse, your customer base.
Yeah, our clients are typically companies that operate globally. So we've worked across the kind of GCC countries a lot. We had about 4 years working on a series of projects that were based in Dubai and spread out across the region. We've recently done phase 1 of a project which is based out in Saudi, and we're about to start phase 2 almost definitely. And Matt, who's one of the business partners, he's about to go and run a senior talent program out that covers across APAC. So yeah, we're really proud. In some ways it feels like we punch above our weight, but I think that's because we're really clear on what we offer, and we've got some distinctions in terms of how we build programs. I was really lucky. I grew up around some people who were some of the world's leading experts in accelerated learning and brain-friendly learning. So as well as all of the research and modeling and insight grabbing that we do around leadership, talent development, strategy, culture, etc., we're also experts in how people learn, and therefore the programs that we create for clients are the most consistent feedback we get is it was the most engaging program I've just run a two-day module, 2-day workshop in a leadership program that I'm running for Park Dean Resorts, who are kind of holiday caravan holiday
Yeah.
organization in the UK, brilliant organization. And again, people saying this is the most engaging version of a type program of this type that I've been on, which is the kind of, you know, when people feel that, then they wouldn't not put their insights into action. And that's the most important thing.
Got you. Got you. No, it makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And obviously you spend, like me, you spend quite a lot of time in the States.
Yeah. Well, I'm typically, I think probably just a little bit less than you, typically over there 2-3 times a year. And I love going out there, and I love working with groups out there, and got friends out there. It was brilliant. One of the people who I interviewed for the book is the VP of customer service at the observation platform in the Empire State Building.
Oh, right.
So again, being associated with brands and organizations like that, as well as the likes of, Legoland's out there, is just, it's fascinating. And there are some differences, US to UK, especially in the service industry. I'm sure that's true in other industries as well. Yeah. But I think there's lots to learn both ways, actually.
Well, I think it's really interesting for us because in reality, 99% of the businesses that we work with in the pharma and bio outsourcing space they're service businesses. Yes, they have technology. Yes, they have technical capabilities, but in reality, they are servicing a customer, and so they often refer to themselves as the services industry. So, I thought this would be really interesting from your perspective, because while you might not have worked necessarily directly in that industry, I think a lot of the lessons from the customer base and the audience that you have sampled for your latest book, The Alignment Advantage, will be really, really interesting for this particular audience, hence why we're talking. So actually, with that in mind, Richard, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about the sort of the premise of the book and the origin story behind writing it?
Yeah, so the core premise is that there is a significant commercial advantage to be gained in aligning our understanding of strategy in an organization or in a team, the culture of that organization or team, and the experience that we want to create for our, customers, clients, guests, visitors. And when I say that at first run, and I'm pretty confident lots of people listening to this and say that, it sounds almost so obvious. Why wouldn't you align strategy, culture, and experience? However, here's the thing. We've asked hundreds of organizations over the last nearly 5 years now, a series of questions. We've got 6 core questions, and then some clients we do kind of more in-depth diagnostics for, but 6 questions that very quickly establish the degree of alignment that there is across those 3 areas.
Right.
And in less than 3% of the organizations that we've asked those questions of, and as I say, there's been hundreds, and most of them are the most senior teams in the organizations, less than 3% give us the same answers as each other when we ask them about their understanding of strategy, culture, and experience. Wow. So in actually, when I wrote the book, there's one of the early chapters in the book's called the 5% Club, which is that how do you get into this 5% of organizations where there is alignment? As the work's continued, I now talk about 3%. Actually, if I look at the figures, it is just around about the 1% mark. Oh. So only 1% of organizations, or 1% of senior teams and organizations, when they sit around the board table or the exec table and talk about strategy, are they talking about the same thing?
Right.
So, and actually, if we add on to that, in most organizations, strategy and culture are never talked about in the same conversation. For years, and certainly, in all the places I think we've been brought up, strategy and culture are often put at odds with each other. Either we're a really driven commercial organization and we're really strategic, and it feels like the culture is a kind of nice, soft add-on. The people stuff kind of is a byproduct that's kind of taken care of by HR or whatever. Or we're a very purpose-led organization. It's all about purpose and delivering our purpose, whether that's cultural purpose or brand purpose. And somehow the kind of commercial bit becomes almost like a dirty kind of side product of it. And neither of those viewpoints are true, because your culture has to be created to be a strategic enabler. We've got to be having conversations about strategy and culture at the same time, you know, and it's happening, and it's happening almost nowhere. And most organizations think they are, until we get in and we ask these 6 questions and present the results back, and they're staggered by the fact that when they're talking about culture, even at the top table, they're not even talking about the same thing. When they're talking about strategy, they're not talking about the same thing. When we ask organizations, even some of the most customer-focused organizations that we work with, when we ask them, what is the experience that you want your clients, customers, guest visitors to have around even the most senior table, they give different answers to each other. That's the premise of the book.
That's the premise of the book. Amazing, amazing. And was this kind of was it a bit of a light bulb moment for you, sort of, you know, as you were kind of reflecting on maybe the bodies of work that you've done with your customers, that you just thought, hang on a minute, this is the same thing I'm hearing time and time again?
Yeah, it happened quite organically. There was definitely a tipping point that I could identify. There was a moment in time where we started to ask questions differently. But there was a number of things that happened which all of a sudden kind of lined up together. So for example, one thing that was quite pivotal or guided us in a certain direction. So we've been for years, probably about 5 years out of the time being doing this stuff, my focus was helping organizations change culture. So we'd done this modeling project where we looked at organizations who had decided to purposefully change their culture, and they'd got to the point that they wanted to. But we also modeled lots of organizations who'd started culture change programs and then hadn't got to where they wanted to. Either it had just stopped and petered out, or they'd ended up at a different landing point to where they wanted to, where they expected to. And out of that, we build a framework. We call it crossing the chasm, which is like, we've got a framework that we can go into any client, say, if you follow this framework, you will get the culture that you want. In that work, what we realized was that the very first step of that cultural journey was that we had to have a really strong strategic business case for change in culture.
Yeah.
Because we noticed time and time again, and you'll have experienced this, and I'm sure those watching this and this will have experienced it, where an organization starts a culture change or introduces a new culture, and, you know, it is the most important thing, you know, it's this number one strategic imperative is, you know, make this a great place to work or whatever it might be. And then the numbers in the organization drop, or we lose a client, or, you know, we gain a big client. So it's all got to be hands on deck for extra production.
Yeah.
So that culture change goes from the number one most important thing to very quickly being pushed, you know, down the strategic priorities or down the operational priorities, in which case we may as well stop altogether, because we can't reignite that. When we've said this is the most important thing, it's vital, culture, actually, no, we're going to focus on this for a bit. You know, people immediately, they've seen new values being launched, they've seen a new vision, they've seen purpose over and over and over again. So we realized to make sure that your culture change stuck, we had to have a solid strategic business case in the same way as you would, I don't know, for a new IT systems integration or something like that, because that kept it in focus. So that was one small example. And actually nobody's talked about the link between culture and strategy. And similarly, you know, in amongst all of this cultural work, and we were doing lots of kind of inspiring leadership, transformational leadership stuff, I avoided strategic work for quite a long time, because I thought I was the only person that didn't understand what strategy really was, and that I thought everybody else kind of got it. And in the end, a client backed me into a corner, and I had to do some work to, you know, if I didn't introduce some real strategic leadership stuff into a program we'd ran for a number of years, I was probably going to lose that client. So I did it was about 6 or 8 month study project of my own, where I read everything I could get my hands on. I went on a strategic leadership for entrepreneurs program at one of the top London business schools. It was like a 3-month intensive, and I came out of it. I had no more idea about what strategy was than I did when I started. I could do a great SWOT analysis, but I didn't really know where it fitted into the process. But eventually, after lots of real intensive work, I got to the point where I had my definition of what strategy was and what strategy wasn't. And also, we built a strategic framework so we can go into a client and say, hey, you want to know how to do strategy? Here's how we do strategy. And now I'm a bit obsessed by strategy. But what I realized during it was, if we have a certain strategic intent, if you in your organization, Andy, has a growth plan, which is to, double top line and bottom line in the next 3 years, you need a certain culture in the organization to enable that.
Yeah.
Whereas if, for example, and again, this isn't a judge at all, because it's an amazing industry, but if we're a building society or we're a housing association where really we've got a really clear and steady 5-year strategy, like a maintenance strategy, and our expectations of our end users are going to remain the same, then actually that requires a very different kind of culture to if we were going to double, treble the size of the business.
If you were a business that was PE backed and just going for it.
100%. Or if again, one of our kind of longer standing clients, major clients, for the first 10 years I was involved in the business, for all they refinanced, the goal was always IPO.
Yeah.
And it was very clear as we ran up to that, even from a slight step away, that actually that was going to require a different kind of culture in the organization. And again, I'm sure as people are listening to this, it almost sounds quite obvious. However, almost nobody has those conversations. Who out there is saying, what is the culture that we need in this organization to enable us to deliver our strategic intent?
Yeah.
Those conversations don't happen together, let alone the culture it's required for our customer experience. But we'll come on to that in a while.
Fascinating. But there is that. I think that I often find people who kind of, on day one, they set a strategy and, they might talk about what the culture is to do, but the strategy, in my experience, I think is the thing that people will invariably prioritize. But I think what we've seen, especially in our industries, businesses will go through startup phase where they have a particular strategy, then they get to maturation phase, then there's maybe a scale phase, and then there's kind of what comes next. In reality, that strategy needs to evolve and develop. And in your experience, do you think the culture needs to evolve in the same way the strategy is, or certainly evolve to be able to deal with the different pressures and priorities that those kinds of journeys bring?
Yeah, let me come back to that point in a moment, because I think the first point on strategy is really interesting, because I've worked with lots of organizations who have grown very, very quickly to being big businesses, certainly in comparison to mine. And actually, when we delve into their strategy, actually they don't really have a strong strategy. And this isn't, sometimes I look and go, and I'm even more in admiration of them, because they've gone so big so quickly, and yet it's done with a business plan, by doing what they do operationally really, really, really well. But actually we're still operating like a multi-billion-dollar startup. So anyone who's listening to this who's going through those phases, the first thing I'd say, just pause and make sure that what you have is a strategy. And in fact, I'll give the first 2 questions out, those 6 that I mentioned. Go around and ask everybody on the top table, or if if it's a small startup, so we're talking more about kind of stakeholders rather than an exec board, whichever. Ask everyone, first of all, what is strategy? And see if everyone gives the same answer. And number 2, what are our key strategic objectives? What is the thing that we are aiming for now? Because there is an assumption in those organizations that because we started, you know, if it was you and I in a business together and we're both talking about, you know, whatever the growth number is or the EBITDA number or the profit number or whatever, because we knew that 3 years ago when it was you and I, that automatically as we've grown that everyone still knows it. And it's not the case. I worked with an organization that I like a lot. They're very exciting. And they asked me to go in and do some consultancy on strategy with them. And as part of it, the top 2 people in the organization came in separately to the room, and I asked them, what is your key strategic objective? And the CEO at the time came in. He was in charge of the largest bit of the organization, kind of operationally and certainly profit wise. And I said, so we're talking about 3-year strategy. By the time we get to the end of 3-year strategy, you know, what is the key strategic objective that we're aiming for? Yeah. And he literally kind of counted on his fingers. And he went, $1.5 billion income. It's like, okay. And we had a bit more of a conversation about whether that was it or whether there needed to be a customer measure in there, a cultural measure.
Right.
Anyway, he left. And as he left, the CEO came in and they kind of swapped. And he said, you're going to find this interesting. And the CEO came in, asked him the same question. What's the overall key strategic objective for the next 3 years? He didn't use his fingers, but he... $997 million. So we'll call it $1 billion. And they left, and the folks that I was working with said, there you go, we are aligned in our strategic thinking. And it was up to me to go, you do know they were $500 million out of their strategic goals, don't you? And they hadn't even noticed. They were like, oh my God, yes, we are. You know, so just don't make the assumptions that just, you know, just because, just because we're working on stuff and we've got business plans that we've actually got a strategy. Because in our view, our definition of a strategy is that a strategy is the overall key strategic objective.
Yeah. And
the rich, multifaceted sub-strategies all the way down to the actions and tactics that when you activate those tactics and actions, they come up and they deliver the sub-objectives and enabling objectives all the way up. So everything influences each other. If we look at, we call them enabling objectives. Some people call them strategic pillars. But, you know, your key strategic objective at the top, underneath that, you've got a number of sub-objectives that when we've delivered, enabling objectives, when we've delivered enabling objective 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that will have delivered the key strategic objective.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's the strategy. This comes from a book by Richard Rummel called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's one of the best strategy books I've read. And in there, he says a strategy is only a strategy when all elements are present. So it's only a strategy when it's the whole thing. So if we've got a key strategic objective, if we've got an EBITDA number or a growth number or whatever, that's cool, but that's not the strategy. And if we have a strategic goal and then 100,000 actions to bring it to life, which is what's true in a lot of the clients we work in, that's not a strategy either. That's a big, complex action plan. Yeah. A strategy is only a strategy when all elements are present. So let's not assume that the strategy is there. However, to go to your point, absolutely, as we go through these different phases, then absolutely the culture has to change, because when we're in startup phase, I'm going to generalize a little bit, but I think it's probably fair that we probably don't even need an espoused set of values stuck up on a wall that we all live and breathe, because we probably come together reasonably organically, you know.
Naturally sort of happens.
And the culture just is. And then there's a tipping point, and I don't think there's a scientific number for this, but, you know, once we get to 8 or 10, or the moment we're operating in different offices or different, you know, countries, certainly, then we have to do more work to ensure that this thing that we call culture, you know, it remains aligned.
Yeah.
So already there's a bit of a cultural journey there. Now, one of the challenges, like we rarely work with we really rarely work with kind of SMEs anyway, but smaller organizations that are family owned, quite often we quite rarely work with those, because the culture of the organization is often driven by the family's thinking, which there's nothing wrong with. But we find once you get up to a certain size, it needs to be different from that. And if we're going out to, investors, that we probably need something different. So this is one of the things that I find really interesting in this work is it stops then being a question of what is a good culture. I always say to clients, I'm less interested in whether this is a nice place to work. I hope it is, but the nice place to work is irrelevant compared to what does the culture need to be to deliver the strategic intent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it may be that the culture is that it needs to be a nice place to work to deliver the strategic intent, but the point is you've got to understand whether that is what you need.
And nice. And this isn't anything against things like best companies or Times Top 100 place to work or anything like that. But who judges what's nice? So if let's take a really, really simple example like Amazon, right? It's so obvious, most people understand it and get it. If we take these three elements of our aligned methodology, you've got strategy, you've got culture, and you've got what we call the X, which is customer experience as distinct from service, customer experience plus brand in its purest essence, what people, feel about it. It's like what you do times your reputation. So if we take Amazon, I don't know what Amazon's kind of key strategic objectives for the next phase of its business is. I know they've launched a new strategy reasonably recently, but if we were to go, what's Amazon's strategic intent? I don't think we'd go far from, taking over the world, be the more, it's something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I had a relatively small group this week. There was about 20 in the group, and I said, who uses Amazon? 20 hands went up. I was with a group at the beginning on Monday for half day. There was 80 people in the room. Who uses Amazon? 80 hands go up. Pretty much everyone uses Amazon. Why do we use Amazon? Why do we use Amazon? Primarily for two reasons. One, it's really easy. And two, if we click it and say the thing will be here tomorrow, the thing will be here tomorrow, even at Christmas, even when there was Royal Mail strikes in the UK.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take over the world, and you're going to make sure everybody gets what they want really easily and quicker than anybody else, in order to do that, you have to have a really driven culture.
Yeah.
And I think most people, I don't think this is negative in any way. Amazon has got a reputation. I don't work with them as a client at all, but Amazon has got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a burnout culture. Yeah. I spoke to quite a few people who work there and who are kind of, business partners, and kind of 2.5 years is not unusual. And then people go, right, I've done my stint and I'm out. And I think if you last 4 or 5 years, you're probably a lifer.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, as long as we go into that with our eyes open and we know what the gig is, that doesn't make it a bad culture necessarily. It's a bad culture if it's not what we want. Equally, whereas a lot of people work for Amazon, again, if they went into a small, sleepy type kind of maintenance organization, it wouldn't be right for them. So the cultural piece is really all about, yes, it's what's right for the individual who works there. But if we've got the culture right to deliver the strategy and to deliver the experiences we want to our customers, clients, guests, etc., then we should recruit the right people into it, retain them, develop them, and also, fire the wrong people out of it as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's that whole sort of it's the transparency bit, isn't it? You kind of know what it is, you accept what it is, and everybody in the organization understands what it is, and you buy into it. As a consequence, it becomes more successful and an enabling culture rather than something that works against the strategy almost.
Yeah, and when it comes to source and talent, your area of expertise, that's critical. The clearer an organization's culture is, then the easier it's going to be for you to source the right people for them. Yeah, because we know what the right fit is, and as you say, the more transparent that organization is about that, then the easier it is for everyone. The easier it is for the leaders to live and breathe that culture, which again propagates it, which means again it's easier for you to place the right candidates, easier for your clients to brief you clearly on what's needed, and for you to place the right people, which in turn strengthens the culture, which in turn should deliver more of what we want in terms of, shareholder value, or delivering for their clients strategically, but also, in terms of the experiences.
Yeah, fascinating. It's something that we've seen in our industry as a real issue in the last few years because of the huge growth the industry has encountered. What we find is that there's a skill shortage, and so what employers who are hiring tend to focus on is the skill, the technical capability of the person, and they almost neglect or deprioritize the alignment of the person with the culture, the alignment of the person with kind of their value system. There are very few businesses, in my opinion, who give this the necessary thought process, because they are under so much pressure to hire the right technical capability that is where they'll get someone who has a technical qualification. But I think if we look at the reason why people leave businesses, it's not because they're technically incapable. Very rarely is it because someone is technically unable to do their job, and 90% of the time it's because they don't align with the culture, the values, the strategy of the business, where it's going. That's the thing that ultimately differentiates. But at the same time, as you said right at the start, it's also that's the thing that is most likely the key competitive advantage that this business can bring in their industry.
Yeah, the challenge with not giving cultural fit enough attention is multiple. And look, I don't want to sound like I'm naive about this. As I say, a lot of our clients are in leisure, hospitality, entertainments, which was incredibly hard hit from a skills perspective. Yeah. If we take COVID and Brexit at the same time for UK, it was a significant challenge, huge, and just really recovering from it now. And also, as I say, some of the, people like Entain and Bally's, who we've worked with over the years, who are, require incredibly highly technically skilled, people in their organizations, they've had similar challenges. So I'm not naive to it at all. However, first of all, if you have a team of people and you've got a couple of gaps in there, and you hire somebody in who might be technically capable, but culturally not the right fit, and you protect them because you need their skills, the first challenge isn't with them, it's with me as their co-worker.
Yeah.
Because as you allow them to behave in certain ways and you let them off with certain things that you might not have allowed in the past, eventually, if I'm one of your kind of smart and talented people, I'll just leave. Or even worse, I'll stay and I'll kind of join in their behavior.
Yeah.
But if I leave, then you've got another gap to fill. And you're much more likely to go, well, I took them and they're managing, so I'll take somebody else like that. So you end up with this, this negative culture, building, where you're keeping your worst people and you're losing your best. We write articles for our website and we post them on socials, as you know, every week. And one of the most read articles that I wrote over the past kind of 3-4 years was called "Brilliant Jerks Will Ruin Your Team." That whole thing of allowing people to behave in a way which isn't culturally aligned. And first of all, you lose your best people, but also as a line manager, I think for most people in a management position, I'm not necessarily talking about leadership here, the hardest thing for people to manage is somebody who is performing really well or has got a lot of experience and is attitudinally incorrect. Incorrect, because you sit down and you say, you're not behaving in the right way, and they go, well, I'm ticking all about, I'm delivering all of the things, we're making sure we're getting the products out, etc. And you go, oh yeah, but I don't want you to behave like that. And they go, well, you can do, get rid of it. And you kind of go, no, it's just so difficult. And the leadership group I was working with yesterday, we were actually talking about this. We were talking about the importance of embedding cultural measures into the performance management systems in the organization.
Fascinating.
So in its simplest form, somebody might have a set of objectives, for example. So we always say, let's say I work for you, I have 3 objectives that are the things that we gauge together. Am I doing my job or not? Just performance measures. I always think somebody should have an additional measure, which is a stretch objective, which helps you with talent development, which if I give it a go, but I don't do it, I'm still performing. If I give it a go and I do it, then I should probably be looked at as talent, future, successor, high potential. And then I should have an additional objective, which again, at its basic level should say something like, and you do all of these things in line with our values, our culture, with the Acme way, if however your culture is captured, which means that even if I deliver what I need to deliver, but I annoy everybody along the way, or I break relationships, I act in a culturally inappropriate way, because it's one of my objectives. You can performance manage me on it in the same way as if I hadn't delivered one of my performance measures. And it sounds really simple, and I think putting it in place is quite simple, but of course it requires the culture to be in place in the first place, and and people being held account to it.
You're right. It's so often neglected, and as you say, you make a really great point where actually the issue isn't necessarily with the person you hire. The issue is with the impact that the person you've hired has on the other people. And you can kind of inadvertently, you can start to deconstruct the culture that you need to be able to drive your business forward.
Yeah, I was talking to an IT director, I think he is, who'd been referred to us for some coaching. And it takes a couple of weeks to have the initial call with him. And he said, I'm quite keen to go ahead and have some coaching anyway for my own development. But actually the key issue that I had seems to have gone. And essentially it was they had somebody in their team. They had 2 real challenging people in the team who was having a negative impact on hundreds of others. And they've moved one of them out of the business. And because as soon as that one's gone, this one is now changing their behaviors. And so many of these issues have seemed to have just kind of subsided, and we all know it, but are we brave enough to wait another 3 months for the right hire, making sure we're engaging with the right person who's going to hire the right people for us, rather than just putting an experienced bum on seat, which most leaders know that they're not quite the right fit, but it's just, are we brave enough to, make those decisions in recruitment and also when it comes to managing people out?
If you think about the book, the alignment advantage, and you think about kind of when you started writing it, when you started writing it, did you think to yourself, I want this to be a toolkit, a manual, something that people can look at and say, I read it while I was away in the States this week, actually, and it was very easy to read, and I've got my kind of views on that, but I'd love to hear what your perspective was. When you wrote this thing, did you set out with it with a particular intention in mind in terms of what the reader would get from it?
That's a really good question. First of all, absolutely. I always want any content that I create, including the book, to be practical. I want somebody to feel like that it's a toolkit. And I'm not naturally very academic. So actually, I think that helps. It's hindered me for a lot of years, but I think it helps because I want to, we've all read loads of books, I'm sure, or watched, TED Talks or podcasts where we know the stuff's good, if only we could understand it a bit better. Whereas I'd rather somebody read my book and went, this is a bit simplistic in the language, if you like. But there's a couple of principles behind it, really. One is this assumption that we all know that we all agree on the meaning of words, and it's just not true. I know I've given the kind of what is strategy, but go, if you're a leader watching or listening to this, go out your peer group and ask everybody to write down what is their definition of strategy, what is their definition of culture, and what is their distinction between service and experience, like customer service, customer experience, client service, client experience. Get your peer group writing down and compare the answers. and I can pretty much guarantee that they will be different. And there's a, part of the book, as you know, is drilling down more into things like, values and just other common terms that are used in organizations, to make sure we all mean the same things. So part of it is, it's no point me being an advocate of having shared understanding of the meaning of words and then overcomplicating my definitions and things. So that's one principle. The other thing is, we, as I say, the big headline of the book, the kind of philosophy and methodology is line up strategy and culture and customer experience. But actually, under each of those strands in the book, there is, how do you build a strategy? This is what it looks like. How, this is how you drive culture change. I talked about our culture change model earlier on. So how do you, if you create a new set of values, or you create what we call a cultural narrative, that codifying of what you want the culture to be, how do you do that? How do you instill an experience mindset, an experience culture? Brand is another example of this. If you look at how many different definitions of brand there are out there, we could have spent the whole time we have together just
talking about brand,
and different definitions. However, like, when most people say brand, what they mean is branding. What they mean is the logo, the typeface, the color, and we kind of know that's just the, we know that's the surface of it, but we tend not to go, hey, what do we mean by brand? Are we talking about the same thing? Because we're worried it probably feels quite simplistic. So the fact that there are all of these elements where people should be able to pick the book up if all they're interested in is, creating a new cultural narrative, bringing it to life, they should be able to read just that part of the book and
be able to
make a difference. So that's the other reason that the philosophy behind the book, I'd like it to be straightforward and accessible and practical.
And it is, and I think it's funny that you said that, actually, because I'm classic for doing that. I look at the chapters and I look at what the chapters are, and I'm classic for seeing if I can read a chapter later in the book before I read the first chapter, and it helps me understand. And I think that's true in this book, actually, is that you can really kind of get into grips with that and
it's the other reason why
in isolation.
It's the other reason why I wanted the interviews in there. There's some interviews, I mentioned Dan from the Empire State Building, but there's an interview with Emma Woods in there, who guided Wagamama. She was the CEO of Wagamama, and she happened to be CEO during COVID and lockdowns, and she guided the organization through there. She's a non-exec director at Huel, and oh goodness, I hope I get this right. I think it's the Gym Group. She's an amazing leader. She's an amazing marketer. She also happens to be, I think, absolutely one of my favorite female leader role models as well. So huge fan. Professor Sue Bridgewater, who's worked in and around marketing and strategy for 25 years. She's at Liverpool University currently. Jamie Charlesworth, who's led service, customer service in organizations with tiny weeny little budgets and huge multi-billion-dollar budgets. He's actually just on his way back from Saudi, having worked in Dubai, and he's, I first met him where he just moved up from taking care of the water park at Alton Towers Resort, so he's incredibly experienced in loads of different ways. So even aside from all of the tools and everything, there's some fascinating stories and interviews with people from all sorts of different sectors in there, and people would get value just from those, I think.
I think you're right. I think the anecdotal examples are, you're almost getting, and I think that's why people love podcasts, right? And TED Talks. They feel like they're getting access to people that would otherwise be inaccessible. And I think that's the same can be said for this particular book. So if you kind of had to, when you think about strategy and you think about the culture and the alignment advantage, and I think the majority of the people who are watching this will agree with you, Richard. They know that that if you can get those two things aligned, then you're going to supercharge your business, and it's going to have multiple impacts and sort of positive impacts on their business, on their people, and on the customers that they're serving. But if you kind of had, if you could sort of, I'll put you on the spot, if you could sort of say, what are the two things that every leadership team should be doing? And then the flip side to that coin, what are the two things they absolutely shouldn't be doing if they want to really drive this alignment advantage forward?
Ooh. One is ask those three questions I mentioned earlier on. Yeah. I've only given 3 out of the 6. I'm actually going to give a fourth out of the 6. When I'm working with executive teams, one of the things that I am really fascinated by is, so the fourth question we ask is, on a scale of 1 to 6, to what degree does your current culture support the delivery of your strategy? Okay. And, depending on the organization, sometimes people go away and they're very quick to admit that it doesn't support it. I always say certainly anything below a 4 means you need to do some kind of cultural work. However, after we ask people what is strategy, we also ask them what their key strategic objectives are.
Yeah.
So we go on, what is strategy? What are your key strategic objectives? What is culture? To what degree does your current culture support the delivery of your strategic intent? I'll give you an example. I worked with a client, again, big tech company. The leadership team from the biggest part of that tech company. So there are about 20 really senior leaders in the room. And on that question, they all gave themselves a 5 or a 6. So they're all going, our culture is obviously great. However, when we went back to the question number 2, what are your key strategic objectives? Out of that, I think there's 21 people in the room, and there was 19 different answers.
Oh.
So for all, what that told us was that actually it was quite a nice place to work. It was a reasonably, positive culture that everyone felt part of, but it wasn't necessarily, they couldn't be sure. It was impossible for them to know for sure whether it was right for the strategy that they were trying to deliver, because they weren't all clear and aligned on that.
On what the strategy was.
On what the strategy was. Yeah. So the first thing would be, ask people, make sure there is a shared understanding about strategy, culture, and experience. The second thing is, if you're certainly for your senior team, be delving into, is the culture right for the strategy that we're trying to deliver? They would be the two, trying to pick out 2. What not to do? Millions. First is, don't assume you all know what the strategy is, or that when you talk about strategy, it's all the same thing. I know I gave that kind of $500 million example earlier on, but if I give another one, and this was one of the pivotal moments in this journey. We're working with this IT business. It was a kind of cloud infrastructure business. So it was a $100 million business they'd been invested in. They had to grow from 100 million to 300 million in 3 years. Crystal clear, simple. There were 7 people in the exec team, including the CEO, who was also the founder. We asked, definition of strategy. They all had a fairly aligned, it wasn't quite aligned, but fairly similar definition of what is strategy. What is your key strategic objective? Out of 7 people, there were 6 different answers. And I was saying that, you're the top team. There's only 7 of you. And I know what it is. It couldn't be any more kind of simple and concise, but you all think you're shooting for the same thing, and you're absolutely not. So all of the downstream problems they had, which were sales teams selling against each other and client services team not servicing clients in the right way, there weren't issues with capability or even hiring as such. They were downstream problems of the fact that even at the top table, they weren't all shooting for the same thing. And actually, we didn't end up doing much more work for that client, because I was the one who had to say, if you folk don't know what the strategy is, how on earth is anyone else down there supposed to know what they're shooting for? And it didn't land particularly positively, but I'd rather call that out. So don't assume you all know what the strategy is. And the second thing actually relates to culture, because we've talked quite a lot about culture, and I'm quite vociferous about this. If you're thinking about doing some kind of culture change program, or you're thinking about driving a culture through, maybe it's the first time you want to establish, you know, a shared and aligned culture, do not start it unless and until you are prepared to do everything required to get to the end point. Because I see time and time and time again, organizations looking to drive culture, then they take their eye off the ball, then they try to reintroduce it later on, and it just, you know, dies on its feet. It's one of the quickest ways to lose trust and belief from your and like followership from the people in your organization. Start a culture change program and not take it seriously. We talk a lot about hedging and side bet theory when it comes to culture. So if you're driving a culture change program, so side bet theory is this theory, again, it's in the book, where if you were to change job and with your additional income, you use that additional income to now buy a nice new car, because you've got a side bet, a secondary thing that rests on that new job, you're statistically more likely to be successful in that new job.
Got you.
Side bet theory. When it comes to culture and culture change, what we need to do is side bet our reputation on the new culture. We need to be one of the ones at the front who are saying this is going to happen, and you can call me out if it doesn't. I'm staking my reputation on it. Because what actually happens in a lot of organizations is the opposite of side bet theory, which is hedging, where we've all seen it. We've got the HR director, we might have the sales director, the marketing director out at the front espousing the new culture, doing the big bang launch. Big bang launches don't work when it comes to culture change, but you know, doing all of that piece. And at the back, I'm going to generalize here, but you've got, you know, the IT director, and you might have the ops director, just taking a, you know, a metaphorical or sometimes physical step back. Because they don't want this failed program, this failed culture to be associated with them. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the people in our organization aren't stupid. And the moment they see that happening, they go, oh, this isn't going to land. So don't start any culture change programs or introduction of a new culture until you're absolutely committed right across the top table,
across the board,
in following it through.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Listen, we could literally talk all day on this, because it's a huge subject, right? It's and there's so many things that you could focus on, as you said, and you know, you could end up doing a whole session just on brand. But I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's really interesting that you've pulled something together that I think is easy to read, it's practical, and people, I think even if they read just 3 or 4 chapters, will get 3 or 4 things that they can take away and implement in their business. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time to share your experiences. For those watching, if you want to order a copy, if you want to know more, I'm going to put Richard's website, company website details in there. I'm going to put a link on the Amazon site so they can pick up a copy. It really is a good investment to have. But Richard, for now, thank you very much for your time. And we appreciate you sharing your experiences with us.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.